Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 15 coverage of the Zurich 1953 Candidates Tournament. This round was really a fighting round. Round 15 is the last round before a break, and it completes the first half of the tournament. So at the end of round 15, everybody will have played every other player once, and all the standings will be even. Everybody will have had the same number of rest days, so a good time to pause and take stock of the tournament. So anyway, a fighting round, lots of interesting games played. I'll give a little roundup at the end. But this game I chose to look at, I thought was had a number of interesting points. I'll point them out as we go along. This is Bronstein, the author of the book that I'm using, playing against Gligoric. And Bronstein with the white pieces kicks off with d4. Gligoric answers knight f6 and c4 and g6. We get a King's Indian defense. So we continue with the normal moves, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6. And now the very first point that is of interest to me and maybe to some of my viewers here, particularly if you follow Chess Explained's channel, because what Bronstein plays here is the Makaganov system. He plays h3, which I haven't seen too many players play at the top level. The top choices are knight to f3 and bishop to e2, which sometimes transpose into each other going into a classical system. Those can be played in either order, or f3, the same-ish variation. So those are the top four moves: knight f3, f3, and bishop e2. So h3 is the fourth choice, the Makaganov system. A little bit of a slower system in the King's Indian. In fact, White has ideas. Instead of just sitting around waiting for black to attack on the king side, White has ideas here of advancing on the king side himself and maybe castling to the queen side. So play continues along normal channels, castles, bishop e3. So part of the idea of that h3 move was to keep a knight from coming to g4 and harassing this bishop. So we've secured the square e3 for this bishop. Now the way Chess Explained plays it, he usually puts in the move bishop g5 first, encouraging the push h6, and then he retreats the bishop back to e3. But aside from that, we get very similar positions in this game. So e5, d5, just locking up the center. Knight bd7. That seems to be, by the way, sometimes White chooses to try and hold the center here, but in this position, this seems to be the only move. You could exchange and go for some queenless middle game with maybe some slight edge to White, but just developing a knight and holding on to the center doesn't really seem to be a move here. It's playable according to the chess engine, but in the database, this is the only move that's been played from this position. So I guess this system is played with the idea of locking up the center. Knight bd7 and g4. g4 is a bit of a rare move right here, but I've also seen Chess Explained play in this fashion. The most common move right in this exact position is to put the knight onto f3. But Bronstein has a different idea here, and we will see it shortly. We get knight bd7, g4, knight c5, and now there's two knights going after this pawn. And of course, that's one of the weaknesses of the Makaganov system compared to the same-ish. The same-ish variation is the pawn to f3 shores up this defense. So White always has to take care of this pawn on e4, and queen c2 is used to defend it here. Now c6, undermining the center, and Bronstein praises this move. He says in the introduction to the game, basically, when you've castled kingside and it looks like your opponent is going to castle queenside, it's a good idea to open up a line over there. Or, in general, when you've castled on one side and your opponent looks to be castling to the other side, you should probably open up a line on that other side and try and get some counterplay. So a very good move, not just undermining the center, but preparing to open the c-file. And now knight g to e2. This is Bronstein's idea. He's going to get the knight to g3 and use that to help shore up the e5 pawn. So we get this exchange and the open line. And queen a5 is played here. Very interesting and enterprising move. But black has his setup on the king side all ready to go. And he's just trying to make some trouble over on the queen side and asking white if he really wants to castle in these circumstances and bring his king over here to where it may get into a whole lot of trouble. White postpones the decision for a while. Bronstein plays knight g3. There was an idea here to play rook b1. But there's a weakness on e4 that because of the pin, white can now, black can now grab a pawn, knight c e4, and with this idea of b4 trying to break the pin, the queen can drop back to c7 and maintain the pin. So in this line, white is just not getting that pawn back. So this idea of rook b1 to try and hold on to that pawn indirectly is not working. So it needs to directly defend it, and that's why knight g3 is played right here. But these ideas with rook b1 and attacking the queen, they are still in the position. Notice that a pawn on b4 would fork the queen and the knight, although it's not supported. So in this particular position, the queen would just take it. But white can set up a tactic here, and he does with bishop to d7. I'm sorry, black plays bishop d7, and white sets up the tactic with bishop d2. So now there's an interesting line here. Black plays rook f to c8. Cancel that. Rook f to c8. Yeah, I'm not sure why the f rook was played there instead of the a rook. In fact, the chess engine prefers the other rook. But you often see this, getting the f rook out of the way. Sometimes, if black is a little bit worried about a king side attack, and a breakthrough on h7, he's actually providing a room for his king to escape with this knight and with the rook move. And then maybe this rook on the a file is going to do some work later. Possible reasons. And now rook to b1 was played here, threatening that b4 push. Now here's the interesting idea, though. b4 could have been tried immediately. And after queen takes, knight to b5. That's the idea. You sack the pawn, but you've trapped the queen. Look at this. Queen is under attack. The knight is defended at the moment by a bishop, and the queen has no squares. That's covered by the knight. That's covered by the bishop. That's covered by the queen. Let's see. Is it possible to play queen a4? Queen a4 is possible here, and we'd get this kind of exchange. Knight takes, and this is about even. Knight takes d6. Rook to c7. So what's the count here? It's 3 pawns over here, 3 pawns. Yeah, the material is even. The chess engine rates this as an even position. So b4 could have been played with that idea. But actually black in this position, after queen takes b4, knight b5, trying to trap the queen, black has an even stronger move, which is just to take the knight, sacrificing the queen for 2 pieces. And then look at this position. So if we count all the material, there's 2 rooks and 2 pieces over here, 2 rooks, 2 pieces over here. So there's a queen against 2 pieces, which is normally not enough compensation for the queen. But actually, this position favors black. That was Bronstein's opinion, and it's also backed up by the chess engine here. It favors black in this position. So with just 2 pieces and a pawn, black has compensation. I guess one problem is that white is never going to castle in this position. There's also moves like bishop to d3, hitting the queen and attacking this pawn on e4. So maybe black can immediately round up some more material. And this queen just doesn't have a lot of good squares. So just pretty interesting. I mean, it's already under attack from the rook. So queen b1 needs to be played here. And the game continues with bishop d3. So pretty interesting position right here. This is the line the chess engine gives, and then grabbing on e4, getting another pawn. So it's 2 pieces and 2 pawns for the queen, and black is doing fine apparently. So an interesting idea. You would think winning a queen for 2 pieces is normally something you would go for, just based on the material. But Bronstein saw this and declined it. He thought black's position was too good there, and it looks like he was right. So rook b1 was played. And now queen to d8, just evacuating the queen side. After this rook move, it looks like white's not castling queenside anymore, not legal anymore. And so the king is probably going to stay in the middle for a while, and the queen needs to worry about is coming back to help deal with some of the threats on the king's side. So queen d1 was played. It might have been better to just continue on with g5 in this position rather than maneuvering with the queen, but it's about the same. a5, queen to f3, and rook a to b8. So still continuing with this idea of attacking on the queen side, even though the king is not going to be over here. If the queen side opens up, it also perhaps enables some attacks towards the king using all the extra space on the queen side. So white continues with his plan, and actually Bronstein writes in his commentary that it looked like black's attack was coming real fast, and he needed to get some counterplay quickly, so he felt like he was forced into playing these attacking moves on the king side here without further preparation. He needed to really go for it. And now, and also his idea is to just try and make black a little bit nervous. And it appears to have succeeded, because black plays the move f6 right here. And the chess engine says it's better to just continue with the queenside attack with b5 and let white do what he can on the king side. So, but it's tough to stand pat. But it's a general rule that you should not move pawns in front of your king when you're under attack. You should find other ways to defend. And of course, sometimes you have to, right? Sometimes it's necessary. But you should always view these pawn moves in front of your king with skepticism when you're under attack. Make sure that's really the only way to defend before playing them. Okay, so bishop e2, trying to get his pieces into a better position here to continue the attack. Knight to c7. Opening up lines for the rook and the queen to come over, and also the knight maybe is going to support some queenside activity over here. King to f1. The king, he doesn't want to castle because he wants to keep the rook on the h-file. He wants to get the king off the back rank, so the king is heading for the g2 square. And that'll allow him to connect rooks over here and continue with the kingside attack. But black makes use of the space that he's gotten on the king side with moving the f-pawn out of the way. Gets his queen to e7. After the exchange, the queen goes to f6. And now there's an exchange of queens. So Bronstein gives Gligoric credit for finding a solid defense here. And with the exchange of queens, the immediate attacking chances seem to have passed, and the game enters into a new phase. It's sort of like a late middle game, early endgame phase. There's still too much material on the board to really be considered an endgame. So kind of a queenless middle game. Not enough force, though, for real direct attacks on the king. And he's starting to be more concerned about pawn weaknesses. So he plays the move h5, not with the idea of attacking so much as just with the idea of getting rid of a weak pawn. Black brings his rook over here to f8, opposite the king. There's an exchange here. And then the king steps up to g2. And this position is about even. Bishop to g7, so getting this bishop back into its normal position. Bishop to e3. Okay, taking a look at the knight here. b5, ignoring any threats to exchange off that knight, and just continuing with the queenside push. And rook b to c1. For the moment, white decides not to exchange off that knight and just to put more pressure on it indirectly. So knight to a6 to defend the knight. Knight to d1, opening up this file here. Rook f to c8, bringing the rooks over, and knight to c3. So white is doing a bit of maneuvering, and now black plays the move a4. And there was a really instructive comment from Bronstein here that I wanted to read. Right at this point he says, both sides are now playing to win an approximately level position, meaning it's even. White shuffles his pieces while black pushes his pawns. And that's what we've been seeing for the last few moves, and we'll see for the next couple of moves. Black pushes his pawns trying to get through the b pawn. He clears the b5 square in order to trade off white's king's bishop there and open an entry for the knight to d3. However, black's accomplishments are temporary, while their drawbacks will be permanent. This is the problem with pawn pushes, is that the pawns cannot go backwards, whereas a piece that has been moved to one place can often go back to where it comes from. So rooks can be shuffled back and forth. The knight, which now retreats to the first rank, will be later aiming for c4. So that's the instructive comment I wanted to bring out, because this is a mistake I often make in my own games. I get to a position where it's about even, I'm looking for a plan, and my first instinct is to push some pawns forward. But those pawn moves are permanent. You don't get to take them back. So if you're stuck for a plan, you don't see a definite way to increase your advantage. A lot of times moving your pieces is better than moving your pawns. Just move your rooks back and forth and wait and see what your opponent does, and maybe as you maneuver your pieces around, you might come up with an idea. And piece moves can often be retracted, so moving your rooks from side to side is often a good idea. Knights are a little trickier to maneuver, so actually if you're applying this strategy of just playing waiting moves, you really want to, the pieces you want to wait with are often the bishops and the rooks and the queens rather than the knights. Although if you have a knight move you can make too, that's sometimes an advantage. But anyway, I just wanted to bring out that comment, because I've often made that mistake myself, pushing my pawns instead of moving pieces. Okay, the game continues, rook c to d1, so more shuffling. b4, so black is pushing those pawns forward. The knight drops back to b1, so he's succeeded in gaining some space here, but this knight can reroute now to c4. It's going to find a good square here. And the square can no longer be protected by a pawn. That's the point of that. These pawn pushes. That's the problem with the pawn pushes, is it gives up control of these squares as they go forward. Okay, bishop to b5 was played here. Black decides to trade off some pieces. Rook takes. And king to f3. The king went over here to the king side when it appeared to be, he left the middle when it appeared to be unsafe there and went over to the king side. Now that the things have cleared up a little bit, the king is going to head back to the middle where it'll be well positioned for the endgame. Rook back to b7, maybe coming over here to harass the king. The king goes to e2. Rook b to c7. Okay, that was the idea. Doubling on the c file. And rook to c1. Knight to d7. So this move is probably a mistake. In this position, we can already start to see some of the problems that black has. So we started from an even position, but now as the material comes off, in particular as the rooks come off, you can see this bishop has not got so many squares, and this is a typical problem with the king's Indian pawn structure. These pawns in the center here block the dark squared bishop, and it just doesn't have a whole lot of activity. So after knight d7, we get these exchanges. Rook takes, rook takes, rook to c1. White is happy to get these exchanges in, and as each rook comes off, White's position is just getting better and better. His pieces are momentarily pushed back, but they can get back into the game, whereas this bishop is going to have a hard time ever getting into the game. So even though the material's even, already White is starting to build up a significant advantage. Okay, so knight a to c5 was played, getting the knight to a good position, hitting the e4 pawn, which is still adequately defended. Bishop e3, getting the bishop back in the game and looking at this knight. King to f7, getting king into the game. Everybody's playing logical moves here. Knight d2, knight b6. And now right here is the 40th move. Well, so White at this point has to make a move and then seal it for the adjournment. And White, Bronstein, chose to play bishop takes c5, which is a good move. But he later thought that it would be even better to play knight to f1, just bringing this knight into the game, leaving this idea here of bishop takes knight for a later moment. Bishop takes knight is a very committal move, but he wanted to take the opportunity. On the plus side, what it does is it gives him a protected pass pawn, which is a real asset in the endgame. And so that's what he was thinking. But also he said, it's also a good piece, and it's a shame to give it up for a knight. So knight to f1, and according to engine evaluations, these are actually both good moves. So bishop takes c5 is not a terrible move, but he, in Bronstein's opinion, he thought knight to f1 would have been slightly stronger. Keep the knights on, maneuver them around, and then only do this exchange when absolutely necessary, because the bishop is still a pretty good piece here. Okay, pawn takes is the move, and king to d3, so activating his king. And now we're in the endgame phase, where it's just minor pieces. And what we want to do is try and create weaknesses, and we've already got a couple here. There's this weakness here, this weakness, and it'd be nice if we could disrupt these pawns here. This is black's greatest strength, is these pawns, but this pawn can be blockaded, and it is actually held back by the strength of the king and the knight. It's not coming forward, so this is going to remain a backwards pawn, and maybe a knight will come to d3 at some point and attack these guys, whereas the bishop is going to have some trouble maneuvering to get to a place where it can defend everything. Notice that two of white's pawns are already on light squares. This one will easily go to a light square, and so this bishop is going to have trouble finding targets in the endgame. So this is part of white's advantage here. So the game continues. King f6, got to activate your king. Knight c4, setting up that nice blockade on the pawns over here. Knight d7, knight f1, king to g5, king to e3. So again, it's a phase where there's a lot of maneuvering. You don't want to allow this king to get in and blockade the f-pawn. So going over here to keep the king out of some key squares is important. Bishop to h6, and now knight to h2. So the knight controls this square, so the king can't step forward easily. He can still go to the h-file, I guess. King to f6 was played, and king to e2. Bronstein writes here, if the king had gone to, let's back up, if the king had gone to h4 from this square with the check, he also would have just dropped back. And he's got to, basically his idea is to, keep the square f3 free for his knight to maneuver, and he's not too worried about a breakthrough. This pawn is always going to be stopped by the f-pawn. In fact, as soon as it moves, he's going to play the move f3 here to stop it, but he wants to use the square f3 for his knight, get it over to the center there. Okay, black, instead of coming forward with the king, went back with the king, probably about the same. King e2 again, just dropping back. Bishop to f4, hitting the knight, and knight to g4 check. So he's getting around by a different route, but still getting back to the center. King goes to e7, king to d3, king to d8. So looking to support, this is a logical plan from black. He's got his strength is over here on the king side. If he can support these pawns and make a breakthrough, that's where his chances lie of counterplay. Knight to d6 was played here. Yeah, the king has given up some of these squares, and the knight can hop in. King to c7, and the knight goes over to f7. And now the move a3 was played here. And Bronstein criticizes this move. It's just a little too active, and it allows him to create some weaknesses. He's going to exchange here, and then there will be 4 weak pawns, basically. But it was difficult for black to find a plan. At this point, the chess engine is recommending bishop c1, and the play might continue. b3, exchange, and bishop back to f4, and king to c4. Just blockading the c-pawn and preparing to, after maybe f3, the knight could come over here and attack this pawn. So just attacking the weaknesses. Black has 3 weaknesses, and white it's hard to give an exact plan. I'll give one more example of a line that could be played here. Could play king to, what move is this? 51. Make sure I get this in the right order here. King to b7. Yeah, it was another plan. If black just tries to stay still, white can start attacking some of these pawn weaknesses, and if the pawn goes forward, it sort of blocks in the bishop, and there's this kind of maneuvering going on. Or if he defends with the knight, then there's also just a bunch of maneuvers. The king comes forward to attack, the knight comes back, and eventually you get to a position. It's hard to give. This is an interesting tactic here. The bishop was attacking these knights in a skewer, and he has this move knight here attacking this knight and leaving this hanging, but it's a trade. Eventually you get to a position as you maneuver around where black just can't hold on to everything. But at the same time, it's really hard to give a formula. You've already created the weaknesses, and your task at this point is to somehow exploit them. And of course, sometimes as you maneuver your pieces around, your opponent may get frustrated and just make a bad move, and you can jump on it, which is what happened in the game. But even if he doesn't, you've got the freedom and the weak points to attack. So basically, it's just about maneuvering your pieces around, making sure you don't fall into any tactical tricks. Probably f3 is going to be played at some point to shore up these light squared pawns. And just attack his weaknesses one after the other, and trying to catch him in an awkward position where he can't defend everything. Okay, so a3 made the game simpler because now he can just exchange, and there's one more weakness to attack. So there's 1, 2, 3, basically 4 weak pawns here. King to c4, king to b6, holding on to the pawn and freeing up the knight to move. King to b3, going after this other pawn. King to a5. And now knight to d6. He didn't grab the pawn immediately. Maybe there was some problem with the king coming in. So bishop c1 drops back to defend the pawn. Knight to c4 check. King goes back to b5. Over to b5, holding on to this pawn again. And knight g takes e5. So it's one of those things has happened. The pieces have been maneuvered to a position where black can't really defend everything, and with that check he was able to win a pawn, and black resigned at this point. So anyway, I thought that was a pretty instructive game and an interesting game at a number of different points. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me give that little recap on the round. Kotov played another exciting game. If you recall, he won a very nice tactical game in round 14. He won again in round 15 with another nice tactical game. Kotov-Szabo, if you want to check it out. Smyslov and Reshevsky both had winning positions in their game. Smyslov against Petrosian got to a winning position, and he was, 10 or 15 moves shy of the time control, and he wanted time to think about it. So he played a bunch of checks and made it to the time control, and then got an adjourned game and went back to think about it. But with all the checks, he had actually given up some of the advantage, so his position was no longer as strong as it was. And Petrosian played a tricky move, and at the end, Smyslov accepted a draw after the adjournment. As they played it out, Smyslov ended up drawing the game. Although there was one opportunity, even after the adjournment, where he actually had a winning move, and he just missed it. So, interesting game there. And then Reshevsky-Taimanov, similar kind of story, where Reshevsky was winning, and he was just one move before the time control. Had to play a move quickly. He was playing his last 5 or 10 moves before the time control with just seconds on the clock, which was a constant problem with Reshevsky. And he played really well up until the very last move before the time control, and he made a move that gave away most of his advantage right at that point. So that ended up in a draw as well. So and also the game Keres-Naidov, pretty interesting game. So games you might want to check out. After 15 rounds, at this point, everybody has played everybody once. And the standings are Smyslov with 9 points is in the lead. 9.5, rather. Smyslov with 9.5 points in the lead. Reshevsky at 8.5 points is tied with Bronstein, also at 8.5 points. So it's Reshevsky and Bronstein are tied for second place. And then behind them at 8 points is Najdorf. So those are your top four after 15 rounds. Everybody gets a break, a long break, and then they'll start up again with round 16 after a few days. And they'll play the same opponents again, but with opposite colors. So they get some rematch opportunities. So stay tuned. I will be bringing continuing coverage of this tournament. See you then. Bye.